going to talk about heat stress this evening. And here's kind of an outline of our conversation. We'll talk about some worldwide implications of heat stress for animal agriculture. We'll talk about cattle responses to heat stress. And let me say the majority of my talk is going to be oriented toward cattle as opposed to water buffalo. We'll talk about managing for heat stress, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. So let's start here. What is heat stress? Heat stress is a combination of temperature here on this axis and humidity. And humidity plays a major role. So think about whatever temperature you're at here. Think about what your humidity is, and we come up with our heat stresses. For example, where I am right now in the United States at about 7:30 in the morning, we're already to right here, about a 78 temperature humidity index. So we can see as it gets hotter and more humid, we get into severe stress. And then how about this one here? Eventually dead cows. So let's talk about the role of temperature and humidity, how it affects our animals, and how we can help our animals be defended against heat stress. How about a cost? Anytime our cattle or any of our animals experience heat stress, we lose milk production, weight gain, eggs produced, whatever that animal is doing. And one of the big things right here is reduced reproduction. Heat puts animals in a negative environment, so they're less inclined to breed, but heat also kills the embryo, as we'll talk about. Heat also challenges the immune system of the animal. So the animal is less able to defend itself against disease agents, and the heat stressed animal is less able to respond to vaccinations. And then from a dairy standpoint, we have reduced milk quality. When cows are heat stressed, the level of fat, the level of protein goes down, and the cow also is more likely to have mastitis, and we have more bacteria in the milk, and the milk does not last as long. How about this item here? The United Nations estimates that heat stress each year costs global animal agriculture over 28 trillion rupee. So there's a tremendous financial cost each year due to heat stress with our animals. What are the cattle responses to heat stress? First of all, the cow responds by increased respiration, breathing more. The cow is designed so that the lungs are going to get rid of heat, move heat out of the animal. But when that happens, we also lose carbon dioxide, which will buffer the blood and buffer the rumen. The increased respiration leads to a water loss. So it's good that our cows are breathing more to get rid of heat, but we have to remember that we're losing the buffering capabilities of carbon dioxide, and we're losing water. Cows eat less when it's hot. It's just like us. We tend to eat more during the cooler times of the year, and the cow is the same way. So when she is consuming less feed, she is also consuming fewer nutrients unless we change the diet. The cow also tries to cool herself by changing her blood flow to go more to the skin, the tail, the ears, the legs. She's trying to radiate her heat out to the environment by changing this blood flow to the skin, and the extremities. The way the cow changes her blood flow is she constricts the blood flow to the intestinal cells. That's good, but what happens is we have fewer nutrients and oxygen delivery to the lining of the intestine. We have less oxygen going to these cells, and consequently, intestinal cells die. We also have a change in water balance because we're getting rid of so much water through the lungs. We now have a more concentrated rumen and intestine for osmolarity, and that affects the absorption of nutrients. So the reduced water balance, the reduced nutrient and oxygen delivery causes cell shrinkage, and the cells die. And let me say this here, this reduced oxygen, this also puts a load on the immune system, because now the immune system is trying to defend against these free radicals. Here's a cartoon drawing. We can say that the heat-stressed cow suffers from leaky gut syndrome. So we're trying to look at the intestinal cells here. And the intestinal cells have these villi. Their purpose is to improve nutrient absorption. And then the intestinal cell itself serves as a castle wall to keep the bad guys, the undigested food particles, the toxins, bacteria, other things. The intestinal cells work as a castle wall to keep the undesirables out here in the intestine and keep the undesirables from getting into the blood. Now, between these cells, we have tight junctions. But when these intestinal cells are deprived of water, nutrients, and oxygen, they die. And so the former tight junctions are now open. It's like a highway for the bad things to get right into the body. Many cows that die from heat stress die from bacteria like E. coli and Salmonella getting into the blood system as septicemia. So the point of this graph is when the cow has reduced water intake, when the cow changes her blood flow to the extremities, we have the potential for loss of death of intestinal cells, less nutrient absorption, but we lose our tight junctions and the bad guys come right into the animal. Lance Baumgart, whom some of you may know from Iowa State University, is one of the foremost authorities in the world on heat stress. And Dr. Baumgart says that anytime the cow is under heat stress, she's under immune activation. Her immune system is now working at a higher level. So consequently, the heat-stressed cow or any animal heat stress is less likely to respond to a vaccination. The heat-stressed animal is less able to defend itself. So I want you to think of heat stress as a glucose drain. Anytime the cow is under heat stress, her glucose demand goes up almost 450 grams a day. Why is that important? Well, glucose with cows is made primarily in the liver from propionate and lactate. And there are times when the cow will actually break down her glycogen to make lactate so she can make glucose. So we need to be thinking, are our cattle or water buffalo, are they producing propionate in the rumen? Because see, we have to have the glucose to fuel the immune system. We have to have the glucose to make lactose or milk sugar. The lactose is very regulated in milk. And if we don't have lactose, the cow is not going to make milk. And the glucose is actually involved in the energy process for making milk fat. So the heat stress cow is going to lose 450 grams a day of glucose to the immune system, increased respiration. If she doesn't have the propionate and lactate to make glucose, she's not going to make milk. It takes roughly 72 grams of glucose to make a kilogram of milk. So milk yield is primarily determined by the amount of synthesized lactose in the udder, which in turn is determined by the glucose produced by the liver. Here's another way to look at this. Increased respiratory rate increases maintenance energy requirement. Dry matter intake is down, so the cow is a negative energy balance. She's having to put out more more energy than she's absorbing. Then when body temperature goes over 39.3 degrees Celsius, we compromise the uterine environment. We have embryo loss. When the cow is heat stressed, there's less estradiol, less follicular development, oocyte quality goes down, and so less fertilization, lower embryo quality. And then even if we do get an embryo, we're going to get embryo loss here. Oh yeah, and then by the way, we lose milk production. So I think of the dairy producer as being in the business of getting cows pregnant and staying pregnant as much as they are in the business of producing milk. So look at what heat stress does to the dairy producer. Embryo loss and less milk production. Here's a study done in the United States that said that for each 0.5 degrees Celsius increase in body temperature, conception rate goes down by 12.8%. Hasn't that been your experience, that your clients have a harder time getting animals pregnant when it's hot and humid? It's because of all of this stuff that's going on. Leaky gut syndrome, compromised uterine environment, milk production suffers, immune system suffers, reproduction suffers. So what are we going to do about it? Well, the best way to handle heat stress is to modify the environment to reduce heat stress. So, Dr. Dixon, I think you said that everybody on the call was a veterinarian. We've got to become agricultural engineers. We got to be thinking about how we can change the environment in which our clients, cows and water buffalo, are in. We got to be thinking about shade, evaporative cooling, and air movement. We have to help our clients develop these systems. Here's a study from Arizona in the United States. So they looked at bare ground surface before and after shading at various times of the day. So at 11 in the morning, when the air temperature was 33 Celsius, the sun heated the ground without any shading to over 50 degrees Celsius. That's hot. 5 minutes of shading lowered the temperature almost over 10 degrees Celsius. And then look what 30 minutes of shading did. So shading is important. And we can go on through the day here. Let's go to 4 o'clock. Air temperature, 40 degrees Celsius. That's hot. The ground temperature in the sun, over 67 degrees Celsius. 5 minutes of shading, look at what it did. It reduced the temperature 12 degrees Celsius. And we go up here to 30 minutes of shading, and it went down to 41. The point being, shading is extremely important. When our animals have to be in the sun, they get extreme heat stress, especially if they're black-hided. This is a picture from my farm. These are cattle I have that are out on pasture. We made a shade for them. This is material that has holes in it so that water goes through it, wind goes through it, and it blocks the sun. And you can see down here, we've got shade, and these cattle are comfortable. They're not panting. It was high temperature, and I've got water here for them. So they're all shaded up. Make use of the shade. Here's a picture Dr. Dixon sent me. I like this. These cattle or water buffalo are under shade. That's good. I would like to see some ventilation here, but it's good that they're under shade. I think this is an important picture. They're working with this animal in the shade, and when I look at the length of the shadows here, I don't know the time of day, but I'm thinking this might be more toward morning. During heat stress, we want to finish working with our animals by 10 a.m. After 10 a.m., it's too hot for humans, too hot for animals. Let's not work with it. Can somebody who's got background noise mute their line, please? So heat stress is hard on the animals. We want to do our animal work early, and anytime we have to work our animals, let's do it in the shade. How about evaporative cooling? Evaporative cooling works on the concept that it takes heat to convert water into vapor. So just a second here. I'm gonna mute the line here because we got some background noise.
Please mute everyone. Dr. Larry, please mute everyone.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out here. Let's see here. All right, yeah, okay. So heat is required to convert water to vapor. It doesn't matter if we're boiling water on the stove or getting water off the animal's back. There's about 540 calories per gram of water at 40 degrees C. So our objective here is to evaporate water off the skin. Hey, can I ask everybody to mute their own lines? I'm having trouble here muting you guys. Can you hear me? I'm afraid I'm going to mute myself. Okay.
I sent a message, but it's not responding. We'll see.
Okay, all right. Anyhow, let's go on. Okay, so here's a
If you go to
picture.
that, yeah.
Okay, here's a picture I took up at Haridwar in the Ganges River in September. So we got water buffalo and a cow that are in the Ganges River cooling off. I think that cooling ponds and cooling river can be important ways to cool the animal, but I have concern about mastitis. We want to keep the cow out of the cooling pond until about 2 hours after milking. Let the teat sphincter seal, otherwise bacteria can enter through the teat sphincter. So cooling ponds have their place, but we want the water to be clean and keep the cow out for 2 hours after milking. Air movement is extremely important, and these are some pictures from the U.S. where we have fans, open-sided barns that are very tall so that heat goes up, and fans. Here, we're using these very big fans that will move air down. So we want to move air onto the animal. Here's a picture that Dr. Dixon sent me. I like this. Here is the dairy producer wetting down the cows. So we're going to get evaporative cooling. Look up here. I see fans. So we're going to get air movement to get heat off of the cow. The air movement is going to help make use of evaporative cooling. We could just wet down the cows without any air movement, and we won't get the same beneficial effect from evaporative cooling. In fact, if we were just wetting these animals down without any air movement, we raise the humidity, we make the problem worse. Now, these animals over here, they're under the shade, that's good, but there's not much air movement, and they don't have water on them for evaporative cooling. We could even put gunny sacks that are wet on these animals' backs, and we get some evaporative cooling. So let's help our clients look at their situations, look at shade, look at evaporative cooling, look at air movement. I think that air movement is so very important. So let's talk about water. Here's the dry cow before she freshens. At 21C, she needs 33 liters of water a day. At 32C, our water requirement has gone up 5 liters. And I actually think these are very conservative estimates. The cow at 20 kilos, she needs 80 liters of water a day. Just that action of freshening, she's now putting out water in the milk, and she's doing a lot more nutrient work. She's a lot hotter inside than the dry cow is. When the temperature goes to 32C, now she needs 100 liters. And the more milk a cow produces, the more she's got to have for water. Now, I really want you to look at this bottom line. I think producers around the world forget about this. The calf at 1 month old, look at the water needed, 15 liters at 21C. At 32C, it's 20 liters. I'm going to make a comment here. Again, around the world, we forget about providing water to calves. We've absolutely got to do it. If we heat stress the calf today, she is never going to turn it into the cow that she could be, provided she lives. So the calf that gets heat stress, she's slower growing. She doesn't get bred when she should. She comes into milk later, and her body is never going to be what it could have been. So if there's one thing that I'm going to ask you to talk to your clients about, is this one right here. Make sure the calves have water. When I was in India in September and October this last year, this was the item that distressed me perhaps the most. I saw calves out in the sun without water. So I'm going to ask you to please work with your clients to make sure their calves have water. So other types of heat abatement, reduce walking distance. Hey, if we have to walk a long way, what happens to us? We get heat stressed. We start to sweat. So let's reduce how far our cows have to walk during the heat. Reduce standing time, holding pen time. If we're taking the cow someplace to be milked, let's reduce how much time they're there. Do this item here. Maximize cow comfort. Good bedding, anything that we can that maximizes cow comfort. So shade, evaporative cooling, air movement, and water quality. Let's pay extra attention to those items. So where do we cool the cows? Well, I'm just going to say everywhere, wherever they are. Tie stalls, free stalls. Look at this item right here. For the sake of time, I'm not going to show the research study. But when a pregnant cow is heat stressed, her unborn calf suffers. That unborn calf inside of her is never going to be the cow she could have been. And you know what? Its calf, the calves that it has, are going to be heat stressed too. So what I'm saying here is the cow that gets heat stressed today, even her granddaughter is not going to be the cow she could have been. I think this is so important. So heat stress isn't just for milk production today, it's for the granddaughter in what, 4 years down the road. So let's think about the maternity pen. During late dry cow period, if they get stressed, they produce less quantity and quality of colostrum. Would all of us agree that colostrum, quantity and quality for the calf is important? If so, then we got to be thinking about the maternity pen because heat stress affects colostrum. Let's have misters or fans at the feed bunks. That's going to draw the cows up to the feed bunks, so they're going to eat more. Out on pasture, let's have some shade out there in the pasture, some trees. Don't lock up or work cows during midday. So we need to think about cooling the cows anytime and everywhere. So what are some diet strategies? Fiber. Let's feed our best quality forages during the hot months because poor quality fiber generates more heat in the rumen, and the heat causes the cow to eat less. Electrolytes, sodium, potassium, magnesium. These get lost in the urine, they get lost in the milk, and this is what's responsible for providing some buffering as well as the osmolality. Starch. I'm going to encourage you to feed maize and rice grain because that is fermented to propionate in the rumen, and it's the propionate that makes glucose. Remember how we said glucose is needed for the immune system? Glucose is needed to make lactose, to make milk, and glucose is also needed as an energy source to help make milk fat. So I think that when it's hot, it's important to look at feeding some starch in the form of maize grain or rice. How about betaine? You have betaine as an osmolyte, and that helps to keep water in the body. And you can get betaine from many sources. You can get betaine from sugarcane juice. There's also betaine powder that you can put in the drinking water. The antioxidants, vitamins A and E, are very important for helping the immune system deal with cell death. Trace minerals, chelated zinc, manganese, copper, and cobalt are important. When I was in India in September and October, I was showing different trace mineral mix to the producers as this is something they could feed during heat stress. And how about this last one here? Vasodilators. Remember how we talked about the cow tries to send more blood flow to the extremities? Vasodilators, the capsaicin from chili peppers, can be very good as a vasodilator. So here's what I would do from a diet. Feed the best forages, make sure we do electrolytes, feed starch so we get propionate for glucose, betaine, probably 10 grams of betaine per cow per day to keep water in the body. Pay attention to vitamins A and E. I would say 100,000 IUs of A and at least 500 IUs of E a day. And then trace minerals, and we might think about capsaicin. I would rather do betaine than I would capsaicin, but some people will do capsaicin. I'm trying to advance my slide here. One moment. There we go. Heat stress drenches. If we do have to heat stress the cow, make sure it's clean water. We don't want to be bringing in E. coli, salmonella. Remember how I talked about leaky gut syndrome? So if you're heat stressed, if a cow is heat stressed and you're doing a drench, she's got leaky gut. And if we have dirty water, we're making the problem worse. But I would look at sodium, potassium, magnesium as electrolytes in the heat stress drench. How about propylene glycol? The propylene is going to get converted over to propionate to help make glucose. The glycerol can also help to make glucose in the liver. Let's put in some vitamins A and E, and then put in some trace minerals. But I guess what I want you to do is think, first of all, as an ag engineer. Shade, evaporative cooling, air movement. Then think about diet changes. Then finally, if all else fails, we can do the heat stress drench. So here's my summary. I want your client and you to think that heat stress reduces every production measurement, especially reproduction. And heat stress is going to affect the granddaughter of the cow, of the pregnant cow that is heat stressed today. To me, that blows my mind. Heat stress affects the calf inside the cow today, and even affects that calf's children. So heat stress is multi-generational. Heat stress costs everyone in agriculture less weight gain, less meat to sell, less milk production, poorer quality milk. So heat stress affects everyone. Reduced feed intake is a problem, but it's only part of it because we're not getting nutrient intake, the leaky gut. I just think this is so important here. Leaky gut leads to a lot of our problems, the septicemia. So heat stress is an immune activator. And again, you got to have glucose to power the immune system. Heat stress abatement, shade, evaporative cooling, ventilation, those have to be the biggest priorities. And then finally, let's sum it up here. Feed an energy dense, low fiber diet to enhance immune activity.